In the middle of a small park cafe, laughter echoed where it should never have belonged. A young tech executive, smirking, arrogant, and untouchable, maliciously knocked over the cane and lunch tray of a quiet, elderly veteran. The veteran flinched, humiliated, his food scattered on the ground as onlookers froze in stunned silence. To them, he was just another target of cruelty, another life crushed under the weight of disrespect. But what no one knew, especially not that executive, was who he had raised. The story that unfolded after that moment would shake the very foundation of power, proving that dignity, legacy, and truth can burn brighter than hate. The cafe was the kind of place where people came for comfort, food, and conversation. Old photographs of the city's green spaces hung on the walls. The air smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries, and tables filled with regulars created a rhythm of familiarity. But beneath the surface of that ordinary morning, something darker brewed. He walked in quietly, as he always did, his gray hair thinned but his posture proud, a simple windbreaker over his frail frame. For years he had lived in that city, carrying with him a strength that only those who endured injustice could understand. Most people overlooked him. He was polite, reserved, never caused trouble. To the executive sitting at a nearby table, he was invisible until he became his target. The executive, Mark, was young, cocky, and convinced his position gave him more than authority. It gave him power, or so he thought. His laughter was sharp, his cruelty louder than the clinking cups and silverware. When he approached the man, no one expected what would follow. He sneered. Then, in one swift motion, he knocked over the veteran's cane and sent his tray of food flying. The cafe went silent. Some gasped, others looked away. The veteran, Arthur, sat frozen, dripping in humiliation, his hands trembling. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't fight back. To many, it looked like defeat. To the executive, it felt like victory. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the man he tried to break had raised someone who would soon change everything. His silence wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of a storm. The days that followed should have buried the story. That's how it usually went. Disrespect in public was often brushed under the rug, disguised as an accident, just a joke or taken out of context. The executive laughed it off. His colleagues defended him, and the city's silence protected him. But this time was different. The incident spread beyond the cafe's four walls. Someone had captured it on their phone, a grainy clip of the executive knocking over the cane, his laughter sharp, the veteran shrinking in his seat. Within hours, it was online. Within days, it was everywhere. The city was divided. Some residents muttered excuses, claiming he must have provoked him. Others were horrified, ashamed of what they saw. For the veteran, the humiliation lingered. But so did something else, resolve. He didn't seek revenge. But he didn't retreat either. He carried himself with the same quiet dignity he always had, even as whispers followed him through park paths and city streets. What no one knew was his history. This wasn't the first time he'd been targeted, and it wouldn't be the last. He had lived through combat, survived insults that cut deeper than any wound, endured the weight of being dismissed, ignored, and underestimated. His silence wasn't surrender. It was survival. And what the executive never considered was that he was not alone. At home, framed photographs lined his mantel. Among them was a daughter he had raised with discipline, compassion, and unshakable determination. A daughter who had left that city to pursue justice in a world that didn't always welcome her. She was a lawyer, now a federal prosecutor, whose name was whispered in courtrooms and printed in headlines. When she heard what had happened to her father, the quiet storm he carried erupted into something louder. For years, he had endured injustice so that she could fight it. Now the fight had come home. The courtroom became the new battleground. For the first time, Mark sat not in authority, but under scrutiny. The video played on screens, the sound of his laughter echoing like a confession. The image of his hand maliciously knocking over a defenseless veteran's cane burned into the minds of everyone watching. His daughter, Sarah, stood at the front, her voice steady and her argument sharp. She didn't just speak about her father. She spoke about every act of humiliation, every abuse of power, and every moment when silence was forced upon the voiceless. Her words carried not just the weight of law, but the weight of history. The executive tried to smirk, tried to laugh it off, but his confidence faltered under the crushing evidence. Witnesses testified. Cafe patrons recounted the silence, the shock, the shame they felt for doing nothing. The city that once protected him now began to see him for what he was, not a leader of industry, but an abuser of power. Arthur sat quietly in the courtroom, his presence stronger than any testimony. He didn't need to speak. His dignity had already spoken louder than his cruelty ever could. When the verdict came, it wasn't just about one executive. It was about drawing a line where silence had lived for too long. The jury declared him guilty: abuse of power, assault, and violation of rights. His laughter had turned into chains of accountability. The courtroom erupted not with cheers, but with the heavy relief of long-awaited justice. The executive lost his position, his reputation stripped away. But the story didn't end there. Across the country, the video continued to circulate, a reminder of both cruelty and courage. For some, it was just another news cycle. But for others, it was a turning point, a call to confront the everyday disrespect too often excused. Arthur returned to his quiet life, not because he had been defeated, but because he had already won in ways most couldn't understand. He didn't need recognition, applause, or revenge. He had raised a daughter who carried his fight into rooms he could never enter. He had endured humiliation so that she and others like her could dismantle it. The city changed, too. Slowly, uncomfortably, but undeniably, conversations that had long been avoided began to surface. The cafe was no longer just a place for coffee and pastries. It became a reminder of what silence cost and what courage demanded. In the end, the veteran's strength wasn't in raising his voice. It was in raising someone who could. And so the question lingers: how many quiet men like him carry untold legacies, hidden battles, and silent victories? How many have endured humiliation so that others might rise? This story is not just about a tray of food knocked over in cruelty. It is about the resilience of the human spirit, the cost of silence, and the truth that no act of hate goes unseen.